In this video, we'll prep for exponential functions by reminding ourselves about evaluating certain exponentials with certain exponents. So first thing to recall that if you have number b raised to the negative m, that's the same thing as 1 over b to the positive m. So let's say to simplify the following expressions, like if we had 3 to the negative 1, remember that would be the same thing as 1 over 3 to the first, which would be 1/3. Or if we had 4 to the negative 2, that would be 1 over 4 squared, so that would be 1/16. Now, just to show you how this will be useful, is like when we're dealing with exponential functions, let's say f of x equals 4 to the x. These are called exponential functions because the variable is in the exponent. That we're going to be graphing these functions and doing things with these functions. So it's good to remind ourselves, okay, what if we plug in negative values in for x? What would be the value of the function? Now, let's say if we had 1/2 raised to the negative 1. Remember, there's two ways you could think about it. First, you could distribute the exponent. This would be the same thing as 1 to the negative 1 over 2 to the negative 1. So remember that 1 to the negative 1, that would be the same thing as 1 to the first in the denominator. And the 2 to the negative 1, when it's in the denominator, that's the same thing as bringing it up to the numerator. So that would be 2 to the first. So that would be 2 to the first, which is 2, over 1 to the first, which is 1. So that would just be 2. Or that's the same thing as 1 to the negative 1, as we were just saying, that's 1 over 1 to the first. 2 to the negative 1, that's 1 over 2 to the first. So that'll be 1 divided by 1/2. Remember, dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So again, that would be 2. Or another way, just thinking that if you raise a fraction to a negative exponent, that's the same thing as raising the reciprocal to the positive exponent. So again, we'd get 2. So like for this one, that would be 1/3 raised to the negative 3. That's the same thing as 3 over 1 raised to the positive 3. So that would be 3 to the third. So that would be 27. Now, another thing to remind ourselves about is that what if we raise a number to a fractional exponent, like to the 2/3, to the 3/2, and negative 2/3, and so on. That's the same thing as, so raising b to the m over n is the same thing as taking the nth root of b to the m, which is also the same thing as taking the nth root of b and then raising that to the m power. So let's say if we look at the following examples, like 8 to the 1/3, that's the same thing as the cube root of 8 to the first, which is the cube root of 8, which, if you recall, you got to think, okay, what number times itself to the third power gives you 8? That would be 2. So the cube root of 8 is 2, so that's the same thing as 8 to the 1/3. 16 to the 3/2, now that's the same thing as, two ways you could think about it, is the square root of 16 cubed, or it might be easier to think of it as the square root of 16 and then cubing that. Well, the square root of 16, that's 4, so 4 cubed, that'll be 64. Now let's see, 25 to the negative 1/2. First thing you could do is remind yourself, when you raise something to a negative exponent, all that does is that moves it down to the denominator. So that would be 1 over 25 to the 1/2. So that would be 1 over the square root of 25. So that would be 1/5. 27 to the negative 2/3. That would be the same thing as 1 over 27 to the positive 2/3, which is the same thing as 1 over the cube root of 27, that's squared. And the cube root of 27, that's 3, so this will be 1 over 3 squared. So that'll be 1/9. Now looking at two final examples, what if we had fractions raised to these negative exponents, or negative fractional exponents? So remember that raising 1 over 27 to the negative 1/3, that would be the same thing as raising the reciprocal, 27 over 1, which is just 27, to the positive 1/3. So that would be the cube root of 27, which would be 3. Because again, you think what number raised to the third power will give you 27? Again, that would be 3. And then 49 over 64 raised to the negative 3/2. Again, what you could think of that as the reciprocal, 64 over 49 raised to the positive 3/2. And then you could raise the numerator and the denominator each to the 3/2. So this will be 64 to the 3/2 over 49 to the 3/2, which would be the square root of 64 cubed over the square root of 49 cubed, which would be, well, let's see, the square root of 64, that's equal to 8. So we'd have 8 cubed, and the square root of 49, that would be 7. So we'd have 7 cubed in the denominator. Well, let's see, 8 cubed, that's 512. 7 cubed, that would be 343. So we'd have 512 over 343. Now again, the way these are going to be useful is to see what is the value of these exponential functions when we raise it to any number. So like when we're graphing it, like let's say if we had f of x equals to 2 to the x, we'd want to know, okay, what happens if we plug in 1, 2, 3, 4, but also negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and let's say we'd also maybe want to see, okay, what happens if we plug in 1/2, 2/3, and so on into this function.